Hi everyone, this is a Q&A recording that is overlaid with a video of me carving a sphere. The questions were put forward on Instagram recently. The questions aren't necessarily to do with the piece that I'm carving, but they're general questions to do with the whole practice of designing, carving and making.
Leshka_wood carvings asks, how do you treat the wood for outdoor placement for weather/insects?
Okay, good question. The treatment for outdoor placement is just simply a mixture of linseed oil and pure turps that is applied with a few coatings. And this is a recipe that is used by the British Museum with the ratio of 9 parts boiled linseed oil to 1 part pure turps. And that is once it's been coated about 3 times and then goes out onto site, is delivered. I wouldn't these days advise reapplying that. I'd just let it weather naturally. Also, the linseed oil and turps acts as a natural repellent to insects. So not only does it help prevent the drying out of the wood, it acts as a deterrent to insects.
@Running Mountain asks, how do you make spheres out of such large chunks of oak?
This is a question that we get time and time again. And we actually use very low technology processes. It's basically the use of a chainsaw, then an Arbortech, and then down to hand tools. But in conjunction with templates that are fitted onto the log. So if you imagine the log is delivered to site, we then have a shaped template. So for the spheres, it'll be half a circle on the template. That is then set into the log, sunk into the log, attached with stainless steel pins, and then gradually rotated around the log and clearing out the waste wood with chainsaws and Arbortechs to then move that accurate template round. And this can take a few weeks to get it round depending on the scale of what you're working on. But that's the principle that we use from pieces that are 200 millimeters diameter up to 2 meters diameter.
@KatieDonaldson_ asks, would you ever consider doing a workshop for beginners?
In an ideal world, it would be lovely to say yes, but practically now, if I was teaching people, I'd want people to come who were reasonably skilled up already, so that we're taking their already skills in 3 dimensions or with hand tools, with edge tools, taking it just that stage higher to be more highly skilled and proficient rather than beginning, because there are lots of things to do with the nature of wood, to do with grain, that it helps if somebody's already got that, so that you can get onto the really interesting and technical side of carving.
@Rotterdam Woodworker asks, what has been your strongest inspiration to make what you make?
There's lots of sides to that. I think it's not just one answer, so I'm slightly cheating on the question, but in terms of other artists as inspiration, and other artists, architects, designers have always been an inspiration, and my strongest inspirations have been people like David Nash, Richard Long, Andy Goldsworthy, Barbara Hepworth, Bridget Riley, Rachel Whiteread. We could go on and on with that. So they're all inspirations in themselves. The material, the natural green oak that I'm working with, is always an inspiration. And the landscape, the greater landscape, especially the South Downs where I live and work, just walking up in the hills is always an inspiration.
@Ward3198 asks, the wood is huge. How do you get it from site to workshop? Who supplies it? Do you use machinery to shape it initially And one more, is it cost effective?
Wow, that's a lot of questions in one, isn't it? Yeah, the wood is huge. So these days, I've always relied on the help of others, but the vehicles to help have stepped up in scale with the scale of work. So now I try and always use as local to the studio as possible people that have flatbeds with a high up crane with lifting gear essentially, who can go from the woodland, pick up the wood and then bring it to the studio and be able to offload it safely. It's usually timber lorries, but also flatbeds with high up cranes. So that's how it gets to the workshop. Who supplies it? So that varies from local estates that are managed sustainably, and that might be storm-felled or wind-felled timber. So I've built up a good relationship with the head foresters on several of the estates locally. So they'll let me know when they've got wind-blown big stuff. Also local tree surgeons and also the local sawmills. That would be the three main sources. Do you use machinery to shape it initially? Yeah, of course. Not, but sort of chainsaws, from big chainsaws, 3-4 foot chainsaws, then smaller chainsaws, and then Arbortex, which are like a regular angle grinder with a disc on there that's got teeth that can just cut through it. They're electrical power tools. And the last question is it cost effective? Well, that's kind of very complicated question, that. Is it cost effective? Well, I'm still here making work and selling it, and I've been doing that for 30 years. So in terms of being able to earn a living and continue with my artistic endeavours, yeah, it is cost effective. But am I going to make a lot of money? No. But am I bothered? No, probably not. I love what I do and feel very privileged to be able to continue to do that and to sell enough work to sustain the studio, the assistants that I have, and the work that we do.
At Franklin Woodworking asks, what is your ratio of flow to effort/work in a day of carving?
Okay, so in an ideal world, I'd be here on my own in the studio, might have the radio on or a podcast in the background or some music, and I'd just be working from 9 o'clock, break at 11, then work till 2 o'clock, have another break, and then work till 5 o'clock. And that's what I would expect myself to be able to do in a day. But realistically, the day gets chopped up with other things like assistants needing guidance, or having to answer a phone call, or a visitor coming that needs showing round, or taking delivery of a large log, or something being picked up for shipping. You know, the business is complicated. There's always quite a lot going on, but I do try and keep the first part of the week, Mondays and Tuesdays, for working just on my own, so I can get into that headspace, that right headspace, to keep the flow.
At Sarah Reason Jones asks, do you follow the natural grain of the wood? How on earth did you get that great ball shape?
Okay, so that's two-parter. I do follow the natural grain of the wood. So I follow what's called the medullary rays that are within the tree, and I also follow the annual rings. People are probably more familiar with the term annual rings because those are the growth rings that each tree puts on with every year of its growth. And you can see them as concentric rings if you look at a cross section of a tree. The medullary rays are a bit more complex, and that's probably what I think you mean by do you follow the grain of the wood. The medullary rays are cellular transport systems that take away toxins from the tree but bring moisture up to the tree also, and they radiate from the very centre of the tree right to the sapwood and bark. And you can see them very clearly in woods like oak. And they were what are termed, if you get a quarter sawn piece of oak, you can see the medullary rays presented as what we would have called figuring, like dancing, light, silvery coloured lines. Those are the medullary rays being exposed.
At Workshop 87 asks, how has your intuition about how to proceed with a piece changed over time?
Yeah, that's quite a difficult question. How has your intuition about how to proceed with a piece changed? Well, I guess your intuition, that's separate to your experience gained through experience, isn't it? I don't think my intuition has changed. I think I intuitively respond to the material like I always have done, and I don't ever get bored of the material. I still find it interesting, fascinating. So my intuition, I think, is still as much fresh and passionate as it was at the outset of my career. But obviously my way of working, the education of how to approach a piece, it is really much changed from the very beginning of my career because of all those years of experience and built up knowledge of the material.
At Workshop 87 has another question. Does the increase in economic value of the commissions you receive change your approach to risk-taking in pieces of work?
I think I always was careful about any commissioned work not taking too many risks because you'd be out of business. So it has to be very organised and calculated, designed. The piece has to be designed to take the risk of it going wrong out. Obviously, working with an organic material and a material that's very much alive and shifting in front of your very eyes sometimes means there's always a certain element of risk with the material. But I think, did you say it's the economic value of the commissions?
Yes, yeah.
Does it change your approach? No, because much earlier in the career, the commissions still meant as much to me, and getting it right meant as much to me then as getting it right now. But I suppose there is a bigger risk with the more value there is in a project, the more risk there is. But I'm much further down the line and have the experience to deal with that, I guess. Hope that answers your question.
At Sebid Hazen, apologies if I'm mispronouncing the tags, asks, how do you maintain your neck and shoulder health / strength? Do you have pain?
Yeah, well, that is really important to have, to be aware of these things and not to neglect your body when it's telling you something's not right. But what I do is have several things. So an osteopath, I have an appointment booked 4 times a year, like an MOT, just to check in, make sure everything's okay. And hopefully that means I don't then have to go, with something going badly wrong and have to go for successive treatments, within a week. So I go 4 times a year to an osteopath. I do yoga regularly. I do stretches every morning to sort of stretch the fascia, stretch the muscles, so that, and also I try and keep myself reasonably fit. I run, swim, and do those things to just kind of keep reasonably fit, to be fit for work. Yeah.
At Philip Kuhlman asks, how long in hours does it take to carve the sphere?
Well, I'm going to be honest, Philip, and I haven't added it up, but it will be, a couple of hundred. I did, well, and more probably, but I did add up the days that I spent on the first egg, and I can't remember that off the top of my head, but it was about 200 days of work. So that would be kind of 6-7 hours actual working within each day. So yeah, it's a lot of hours. It's very labour intensive.
At Nico Salotu asks, how long have you been doing this kind of art? As a child, what were you like?
So I've been doing the wood-based art, sculpture, for about 30 years, or maybe a bit more than that. I suppose I left college in 1989. So I've been doing carving big chunks of oak since then. As a child, I was always making things. Not wood. I didn't do any woodwork until I was at college. But I would be drawing, I would be sewing, knitting, making things out of cardboard boxes and making little bits of furniture out of match boxes, and making little dolls' houses, sewing little dresses for dolls, all that kind of anything that I could get my hands on, really, to make things with.
At Christian Karasi asks, hello, is the oak wood you use already dry, or is it fresh, as in still wet? They also ask, how old after the cut, which machine do you use for cutting in deep but controlled?
The oak that I use is classed as unseasoned, so it is not dry. It is fresh and it is still wet. The old boys at the sawmills used to say, let the tree know it's dead, so they wouldn't start cutting into a felled tree or a fallen tree until about a year after it had been felled, because it still has a lot of internal tensions to do with the growth, and that needs to relax out of the tree. Which machine do you use for cutting in deep? That might be the Arbortech that you're referring to, or the chainsaws. So we'd start with chainsaws to take off bigger pieces of waste, and then work down to the Arbortechs, which is like I said previously, like a regular angle grinder with a rotating disc on the end.
At Alexa Glancy Design asks, what has changed in your approach to carving the wood over time? Has the depth of the grooves ever altered? Have you ever been back to recarve a piece?
Whoa, quite a few questions in one. Has your approach changed the carving the wood over time? Yeah, I think it's got more and more refined as my skill in carving has become greater. Then I've refined how I carve the wood. So it was much looser and rougher when I started, because I didn't really know what I was doing. But now it's much more controlled. Has the depth of the grooves ever altered? A little bit. Sometimes if I was carving with the medullary rays, I might do that from one end of the sculpture to the other, and the grooves would be a few inches deep. But then on such as the sphere that I'm carving at the moment, some of the grooves are just a few millimetres deep. And actually on a piece, the grooves can vary in depth tremendously. Have we been back to recarve? Yeah, we do go back and maintain some of the pieces. In fact, we've just got one we're going to be doing in the next few weeks, which is not recarving, but maintaining a seat around a tree that was first made 30 years ago. So we're doing a bit of maintenance on that.
At TRC0408 asks, how on earth do you keep your focus?
Well, I've never had a problem with that, fortunately, that I can just concentrate for long periods of time.
At my mum taught me to sew asks, when did you realise your worth as an artist?
I think I'm still realising it.
At Workshop87 asks, how would your mental health / attitude towards your work change if you are working alone?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's very healthy to work with others, but equally I really enjoy working on my own sometimes, and as mentioned earlier, I try to divide the week so that I've got some time, the Monday and Tuesday traditionally, for working alone, and the latter part of the week having the assistants come in and help.
At Mr. Liz Hopkins asks, what part of your body hurts the most after a day in the studio?
Right, okay. Probably neck and shoulders might ache. Sometimes my hands. But often these days, actually, my eyes. Yeah, as I get older, my eyes ache. But you said hurt. I wouldn't say they hurt. I don't think anything hurts. It perhaps aches. But that's nothing that a nice glass of wine wouldn't sort out.
At Randy Goldberg 2 asks, do you ever change your mind in the middle of a project? If so, do you put away the project and start anew?
It probably wouldn't be as dramatic as that, but what I will say is that not everything is sorted out when you start the project. You perhaps might change something slightly or have to change something because of what the material throws up. But I don't think... it would be a very long time since I rejected a piece if I'd already invested quite a bit of time and effort in it to start again. That's something that just wouldn't make financial sense now. So no, I wouldn't allow that to happen.
At Key Acupuncture asks, how do you visualise the surface?
So I guess because I've got the experience I have got of 30 years of working with the material, I can anticipate how it's going to react. But I do try to push my practice on and experiment every so often where I might not be able to visualise the end result. But I use sketchbooks to sketch things out, and I would trial things on test pieces.
At Fizzilk asks, do you listen to music, podcasts or book whilst you're at work? If so, which? Or do you prefer silence?
Well, all those actually. I do sometimes listen to music, sometimes listen to podcasts, and sometimes more recently the audiobooks. And a couple that I've listened to recently are the Wilding by Isabella Tree and also Woodsman by Ben Law. The music that I listen to varies massively, from reggae to 80s disco to listening to NTS radio. But sometimes it is lovely just to have the silence or just hear the birds and the bees, and that makes me remember how it was in lockdown when I didn't want to use any power tools, or I was just using hand tools and couldn't have the assistants working right at the outset of the lockdowns. And it was that beautiful summer in the UK. So I had the barn doors open and the sun was out, and I didn't want to listen to the radio. So it was wonderful just to have the birds and the bees.
At Zenzeri asks, do you generally use oak as your medium, or are there other woods that respond well depending on the effect you want to achieve?
Yeah, great question. I generally use oak, especially for the larger scale sculptures because it's available locally. But I do love working with walnut, which isn't available in large pieces here in the UK. You're lucky to get diameter of 12 inches. But yeah, it doesn't come in such large sections, so I tend to use walnut for the smaller pieces, and it's very tightly grained, has a beautiful rich colour, and I really enjoy using that for the smaller scale works.
At Christian Brown asks, how do you turn your spheres?
So I'm thinking that you're talking about this, Christian, as when the piece is inside the studio and we're moving it around, not how do you make the sphere in the first instance. I think we've covered that already with someone else's question. But how do we move it around inside the studio? Well, we roll it manually and use wedges to hold it in place. And the 1.2 metre sphere I'm currently working on, I can move myself by pulling out the wedges and just gently moving it. But I'd only move it a little way, like a tiny turn, just to get the angle right for how I might be carving a complex detail. But if I wanted to make a significant turn, then I'd get Phil or one of the other assistants to help me, so there'd be two of us rotating it.
And for the final question, at Overlook Wood asks, do pieces sometimes split too much and deviate from the original form / intention? If so, how often? And do you embrace the change, or do you make that piece firewood?
Right. Well, luckily that doesn't happen these days, but definitely in the beginning, when I was first learning to work with the material, I did have some pieces that split and completely fell apart. And one of those was even a commission, I think, and I had to remake the piece. But now, because I've learnt what I have about how to predict the wood will move and twist and warp or split and crack, then I can work with the material and design accordingly, so the risk is minimised of bad cracks or happening. So that's just built up over the 30 years of working with the material. But I did make mistakes at the beginning, but you have to make the mistakes in order to learn what works and what doesn't. Thank you very much for your questions. I hope you feel that they've been answered well, and look forward to doing some more in the future.